I'm Sarah Fenske, and this is the 314. Every episode, we sit down with St. Louisans who know what makes this place tick. Together, we explore why things are the way they are and how we can make them better. This episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by Ryan Lawn and Tree. Marie-Hélène Bernard is having a busy week on top of a busy month. Wednesday was the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra's annual concert in Forest Park. And Friday, we'll see SLSO cut the ceremonial ribbon on its home, Powell Hall, after $140 million in renovations. As the Symphony's president and CEO, Marie-Hélène has been focused on the project since she first arrived in St. Louis a decade ago. But she has even bigger things on her agenda, making sure the city she's grown to love has a bright future. In just a minute, we'll hear from St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Krull, who's been covering a new law aimed at helping landlords that may have unforeseen consequences. But first, Marie-Hélène Bernard, welcome.
Good morning, welcome.
So you have been gearing up for Friday's ribbon cutting for a long time. And I'm wondering how far back this goes for you. When did you realize that Powell Hall needed a significant renovation?
When I was interviewing in the fall of 2014 for this position.
So you were just here to see if you wanted to be president and CEO, and you were immediately caught by Powell Hall.
Yes, and I will never forget, it was October 2014. I was taken to Powell Hall, and the majestic view of Powell Hall, it takes your breath away. If you've never been there, you walk in and I thought, oh wow. And immediately my eyes landed on a line of men. And I've told this story quite a bit. And I was with a board member and I said, what are these men doing there? And I said, oh, don't worry, they are just waiting in line to go to the restroom. And I thought, you have a problem. And then we went upstairs, and I saw the hall was starting to show its age. It was a beautiful venue, gorgeous, but you can see, I've been in the orchestra concert business for a really long time, so you learn and you see things that sometimes other people don't see. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And my memory of it is the hall looked fatigued. And then I went backstage, and there was none. Like, I went back, and I thought, oh, my gosh, these musicians have nowhere to go. And then, I left, and then I was so taken by St. Louis. By the way, I fell in love with St. Louis that time. Fall in St. Louis is gorgeous. I came on gorgeous, sunny, crisp days. I was taken to Forest Park. I thought, wow, an art museum and the botanical garden, everywhere. And I thought, this city is remarkable. And I lived in Boston at the time. And this jewel of Powell Hall and the history and the history and the legacy of the St. Louis Symphony. So when I was hired, I did ask our board leadership at the time, would you let me explore this possibility? And at the time, they didn't feel they had the resources. And then over the time, I put things in place to give them a good... to establish the why. Why should we do this? And that was the beginning of our relationship, which 10 years later is leading us to this wonderful moment of reopening Powell Hall.
So this was on your agenda from the beginning.
Oh, yes.
And I think so many of us who are used to going to Powell Hall, we're like, we love Powell Hall. Yes. It's perfect. It doesn't need to change.
Yes.
You had to lay the groundwork of, actually, this perfect hall, there are some non-functional parts, even though it's beautiful.
And it was not to change. It was very clear from the beginning. It was important to preserve the historical nature of Powell Hall, what it means, the beauty, and that's what we did. We refreshed it. This building is approaching 100 years in November of 25. It was open in November of 1925. So any building of that stature, imagine what we had to do to bring it up to code, electric, plumbing. There's a lot of things behind these walls that need nurturing, and it's like any building, as it ages, you need to address, and it's a safety issue too. But what was very critical to the project was this expansion, which was a wrap around the building to create more ample space and to think about the way audiences enjoy music in the 21st century and the way social, the way people enter into networking, socialization, and what it means to be a community in music and in a creative space. There's the before, the during, the after. The dream is you want people to come regardless of what you're going to play on stage.
That they're there for maybe that pre-show mingling. They're there for the post-show drink at the bar.
Yes, because it's a space that's inviting, that's architecturally beautiful, inspiring, that's comforting. And it's a space where no matter who you are or no matter what your knowledge of music is, that you feel you're drawn to it. And it creates a sense of community. You know, community can mean many things to many people, but it was definitely part of the plan for this project. So when I came in, I was appointed in February of 15, and I traveled often to St. Louis from Boston and moved here in June, bought this large mansion in the Central West End, which I lovingly renovated and poured more money into it. Since then, I have sold, but in the process of this, did a strategic plan with our board and created a Powell Hall task force that very early on in the fall of 16 set the stage for the direction of this project.
I love that you have only been in St. Louis about 10 years, and yet you've pulled off 2 large renovations during that time. You also renovated your personal residence.
Yes.
Now you've moved on to this. What is most maybe surprising about this Powell Hall renovation is you guys have managed to do this on schedule.
Yes.
That seems unprecedented. These things never finish when they're supposed to finish.
Yes. So on schedule, within budget, and we had very few change orders. You know, any project calls for change orders, and I was comparing to another colleague in town, and I can't remember what project, and we are just on change order number, let's say 16, for a project of that magnitude. It's unheard of.
How were you able to do that?
Well, several things. First of all, I think we have the best project manager in the world, Anna Levy, who worked on the arch, and she's working on the brick line. I hired her early in 2018. The arch had reopened, and I had several board leaders who had worked with her on this project and said, you need a partner. I knew I could not rely on my very limited expertise, and I'm being the CEO, you run an organization, and that no one on my team had the experience. And I did not want to hire someone full-time on staff. It had to be someone who was deeply invested in an expert. So Anna is that person, and since 19, she and I have worked very closely, and she's our client rep. She's the representative, and has worked with an extensive team of people who are excellent. I think we have the A++ team: Snohetta, lead architect, Christner, architect of records, and theater consultants and acousticians, and the list is long. And BSI, the construction company, who gave me numbers in February of 23 that are still holding true today. And that speaks of their extraordinary integrity, but also they are very seasoned. They know the field. Yeah. We were really coming out of pandemic, so we started design. We hired architects in 19, started a design. And we'll never forget, in March of 20, when pandemic hit, we were on constant Zoom conversations to finalize the design. Oh. So it was at a time where the industry shifted very quickly. That labor, cost of labor, material, and labor was short. There was a shortage of labor. So all of this came together. So by February of 23, so we're 3 years later, we had, experienced that wave of cost and labor increase by then. So the numbers they gave us then are still holding today, and we're still within the timeline. And there are things we added to the project so there were no changes due to things we didn't do right, but it was things that we decided to do because it was a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Give me an example of something you added.
The painting. So initially, the repainting of the entire concert hall and lobby space was not part of the scope. And when we removed the seats, we realized the floor had to be changed. That we knew, but the stage floor was at the end of its life. We didn't know that, so they said we need to replace that. So that was a change. And then the painting, when they opened the windows and we saw natural light, it had not been repainted since 1967.
Oh, wow. Okay. It needed it.
Yeah. So, and just time. So what we thought, okay, well, we needed a crew of 10 painters with little brushes, and then we had this scaffolding. It was magnificent. It was a work of art just in itself, but they just repainted the entire, and I'm so glad we did it, because when you come in, you'll see it's bright, it's inviting. And so there are a few things. Plumbing, it's another example in the Powell Hall existing building. When they open walls, they said, and those pipes go back to 1925, and some of them were looking a little rusted. So I said, we change, we have to update this. So that's an example. There's a long list, but ultimately these are all things we decided to do.
And you mentioned the plumbing. That brings it back for me to that initial impression you had of Powell Hall, the gentleman waiting to go to the men's room.
Yes.
Have you solved that problem?
Yes.
You're sure of it? There's not
yes.
going to be a line of men on opening weekend?
I'm going to have cocktail parties in the ladies' room. Yes, no, it will not be a problem. We added several for men in a new space and also a significant number of restrooms for ladies, but also family room and gender-neutral rooms. So we have several options. So if you're coming with your baby and you need privacy to change diapers, there's single rooms that you can use. Or if someone is not comfortable using either ladies or gentlemen, can use a just family gender-neutral room. So we provided a lot of opportunities. Also, we made the hall completely ADA compliant. When I say compliant, it's not like Powell Hall was not. It was just an older building designed in 25 when, awareness and laws were not the same. So I'm very proud of the fact that you can access the concert hall from various entrances, 3 distinctive entrances that have ramps. We had added elevators. So whether you push a baby in a stroller or your mother in a wheelchair, we are making it a lot easier for everyone to enter and find seats that are comfortable for them. So 22 additional ADA, so accessible seating throughout the hall.
My guest today is Marie-Hélène Bernard, President and CEO of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. We'll be back to our conversation in just a moment. First, a word from our sponsor. For nearly 40 years, Ryan Lawn and Trees, Ryan Pros, have helped families around the area bring their outdoor dream to life with expert lawn care, tree and shrub service, landscaping, and pest control. Whether you want a greener lawn, healthier trees, or a backyard that you love spending time in, trust the local pros in the clean red trucks. Learn more and see their work on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Just search for Ryan Lawn and Tree. And now back to our conversation with Marie-Hélène Bernard, talking about St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, just about to cut the ribbon on its gorgeous new renovations, which you can see driving down Grand now. It's such a striking entrance. Something else that's been a part of this, it hasn't just been managing the construction process. You guys have also been on the road.
Yes.
The Symphony has set up shop at different venues around town. I imagine that has had many stresses of its own.
Yes, so imagine, as we designed this project, pandemic hits. So our industry was deeply affected, right? It completely changed the way people enjoy art, music, and so on. So it took us a wave of 3 years to bring audiences back. And at the time this was happening, the plane was taking off and we were just going up. And then we had to move out of Powell Hall in May of 23. And we had extraordinary partners, and I want to acknowledge them. Chris Zimmerman, Blues, they run and own Stiefel. So that team really helped us make a home away from home for half of the season. And Stiefel was our home when it was the Kiel Opera House from 1934, from the time it opened until 1967.
So you guys went back to the beginning.
We went back. And the other great partner was Chancellor Kristin Sobolik at UMSL, giving us Two Hill for half of the season. So I would say that overall, I think most of the classical concerts were at Two Hill. Large productions had to be at Stiefel because the Two Hill stage is a little smaller. But the Two Hill access, so I'm very happy that we brought audiences there because I believe, and Chancellor Sobolik knows this, and her team was very happy about this. I do believe it has changed the perception about Two Hill as being too remote, too hard to get to. Actually, it's not.
Yeah.
It's a perception of it.
It's such a St. Louis way of thinking that maybe a 15-minute drive away is too far.
And then also, I think symbolically, the fact that it's in north of the county, but it was actually easy access. And for our orchestra, it was easy to navigate, and they were great partners as well, and parking was easy. And Stephen was an equally great partner, and Stiefel has a lot of history, and it's a beautiful venue. And again, the perception there that we faced was the perception of downtown not being safe and people seeing the parking as more complex than it needs to be. So my team had to communicate very carefully and really making sure, because people go to baseball games, they go to soccer, they go to the Blues, but there's a bit of a perception. So planning was everything, and I want to also praise our audience and newcomers. We made so many new friends.
Did you find that people were showing up at these two venues who hadn't gone to Powell Hall?
Yes.
again, this is not like these venues are that far
No.
from Grand Center. What do
No.
you think that was about?
I think our program continues to diversify. I think being in different venues, and I think people want to show up and be supportive. We have probably, 30% of our audience is under the age of 44, and they buy tickets to classical music. So music speaks to the heart of human beings, and people have a perception that it's only old people who buy tickets to classical music. That's far from being the case. The difference is that someone who's 75 years old, retired, who loves music, who comes maybe 6 times a year. If you're 32, you're raising a family, you have a busy job, you may not come as often. But I think the commitment and the curiosity, I think we have an amazing community that's deeply invested in the arts, and I think I see this more and more, and I want to encourage people to try, because you don't need anything special to come and hear the St. Louis Symphony. Bring yourself, let your heart flow, your mind, whatever. And usually I always tell people, trust your intuition. If you like what you hear, that's all that matters. And if you don't like it, also it's very important. And so this is giving a validation to people to that they don't need to have the intellectual experience to enjoy it. It's a matter of the heart. And we've expanded our program in such a way that from age 2 to age 100, regardless of your taste in music, there is really something for everyone.
So finding that you were able to attract certain audience members who maybe hadn't come to Powell Hall, but were willing to try the Two Hill, now that you're finally about to reopen Powell Hall, do you feel like you might be more inclined to take this show on the road, not just to Art Hill for that annual concert that everybody's into, but to say, okay, maybe we're going to do a concert in North County next year?
Yes, and we had started a series at Lindenwood, so that will continue at some point. And also, we tour our state, so we go to Columbia, we go to Cape Girardeau, so it's very important to us beyond the St. Louis region to make sure that Missourians get their access to the St. Louis Symphony. We have a lot of people coming from Kansas City to hear us. We are traveling also in the Midwest, where we go to Nebraska. We were in Iowa recently. So it's important for us to be also the orchestra of the Midwest, because we have this nimbleness, and I think we're the best thing around. I think we're a better orchestra than the Chicago Symphony. Just thinking. So, I think so. But anyway, so it's like how, and in looking towards the future, and the new strategic plan that our board has approved is the idea of being of service to the community. And that community is, of course, our region, but it's beyond. It's the world community. And this new building is definitely going to make St. Louis an international destination.
So in that strategic plan, which I understand you guys just ratified, formalized, part of this talks about, you see part of your job as elevating St. Louis, quote, nationally and internationally. Can a symphony do that when you have a city like St. Louis that has frankly struggled with its image outside of this region, maybe also inside this region, actually?
Absolutely. I think the St. Louis Symphony, with other arts cultural partners, is more than just a performing arts organization. We're an agent for change, for social engagement, for elevating that brand, that awareness of our city that basically holds among the finest institutions in the world, whether it's the zoo, the botanical garden, the orchestra, the art museum, modern art, the whole, how it attracts artists from all walks of life. We just need a different narrative, really. And I have traveled the world and lived, my father's Belgian, I'm Canadian, I was born in Montreal, live in New York, Philly, Chicago, everywhere. I think St. Louis has so much to offer. But we need to do something about elevating this. So in the course of this year, we're going to invite reporters from around the world, from leading publications in music, but also in other sectors. And it is our job, as we work with Greater St. Louis and Explore St. Louis and other arts institutions, to really make sure that the talk about St. Louis goes to a different level. We're ready. We just got to do it. And I think we have the right spirit. And I think we should be more fearless and just go for it. I have no trouble saying that we have among the finest institutions in this city. The quality of life is extraordinary. And I think everything, schools, health, culture, history, it's quite remarkable. Food, oh my gosh, we have so much great outlets. We just need to encourage people to engage and just support and really get the business community to, and the business community is not just the big ones, it's everyone. I think there's a new era engaging the mid-sized businesses. There's a lot of entrepreneurs in our town. And I think, how can we come together and just really realize that dream? If Cleveland, Detroit have done it, we should be able to do this.
It is interesting to me. I'm from Cleveland. And I feel like for whatever reason, in the last 10 years, Cleveland has seen this resurgence of like, they're proud to be from Cleveland. That I don't feel in St. Louis, when for me, I feel like St. Louis has so much more to offer.
And I worked for the Cleveland Orchestra for many years. My brother is a first assistant principal cellist there. So I know they stand very well. St. Louis is so much more beautiful.
It is,
just the architecture of St. Louis is absolutely... Coming from Boston, I saw a lot of similarities also. And I think that cities all have problems, and the pandemic has really transformed the way. And probably our cities were not ready for this. I mean, no one was ready for this. And now we're emerging from, so we need to lead with courage and confidence, but it needs to be a collaborative effort. It's not the arts alone. It's not the business alone. It's not the innovators. We're all innovating in so many different ways. We just got to be one and lead with confidence. And so that's why I say I'm absolutely not shy of saying and it is true, Powell Hall is one of the, if not the finest concert halls in the country.
So you bring in musicians from all over.
Yes.
Because this is key to St. Louis Symphony Orchestra being what it is, that you guys attract the best. Is it sometimes hard to get people to want to move to St. Louis? It
is. It's not so much hard for them to move here. Is the attraction for them being lured to other jobs. Usually when they leave for higher positions. And of course, pay is always, but the irony is often if they are attracted to getting a pay, if it's in New York or San Francisco, the cost of living is 3 times what it is here.
Yeah.
So there might be prestige going with this, and yet at the same time, their quality of life is probably diminishing. I mean, I talked to players who left us to go to San Francisco, and they probably spend 2 hours of their life daily commuting to rehearsals. So, if you want to raise a family, if you want to buy a home, I mean, I think the difference is that younger players who establish a life here in St. Louis will probably, by age 30, have the ability to just really invest it from an economic and save for the future, and if they love the community. And that's regardless. This is something that's very personal, so I think you can't say everyone is loving St. Louis. Some people need an urban environment that is a lot more like an LA or New York, which is also understandable. But I continue to believe that to make the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra one of the most envied orchestra in the country, and it's happening with this hall. We just announced a new contract a year early.
Your contract with the musicians doesn't go into effect for a full year, but they've already ratified it. Is this like this kumbaya moment? Everybody's on the same page.
Right. Well, we planned it, but also we work really hard on our culture, I think internally and externally. So this is not by accident. I think it's same with our staff. We're a nonprofit organization. I don't pay salaries that are matching some big corporations in town. And same with the board. The culture of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra is very special, but we shaped it, forged it, and it's hard to build, but it's super easy to lose. So there's this kind of trust, confidence, and also integrity. I think for us, and it's in the plan that we are committing to this community. The music is for community, and the artistic integrity is very, very important. But at the same time, we want to be good financial stewards of people's investment. So, the donors who have supported this institution, or the new ones who are supporting us, need to know that we don't take their trust for granted, that we are working really hard to really make sure we fulfill our mission.
And this project, you had to raise an extraordinary amount of money. The physical project is $140 million.
Correct.
You set out to raise $155 million. I imagine there were plenty of orchestras and symphonies around the world that are like, whoa, you can't do that with all private funding. Like that's insane.
Yeah.
You've been able to do that.
Yeah, we raised so far $173 million.
So you have exceeded. You have blown past that goal.
Yes.
Is that is mostly coming from St. Louis? That's the community?
Yes. There's a few outside gifts, but mostly it's gifts from St. Louisans. And everyone really engaged in this campaign. You know, campaigns are for everyone. So I have staff members and musicians who contributed. Our volunteer association collectively brought over $600,000 in gifts to this project. And it had two components: the project itself, so renovation expansion, and the endowment, continue to grow our endowment, because one of the things St. Louis did very well 25 years ago is establish an endowment that allows to support of our operations. You know, a third of our budget is covered by the draw from the endowment, so we do have a large endowment, but we need it. Because I don't have the population of LA and New York, I need an endowment to sustain philanthropically the portion of revenue that I will not be able to generate, especially if the population of St. Louis continues to decline. So if you ask me, if you look ahead of next 5 years, right now I'm planning 29-30. It's going to be the 150th anniversary of the orchestra. We're the most innovative in the country, second oldest after New York. But unless, and this is the only element we don't control, unless the population of St. Louis doesn't grow, we will not able to fully support our artistic and audience aspirations.
So your fate is really intertwined
Yes.
with the fate of this
Absolutely.
city. Is that what has made you so focused on, we need to be fearless in telling the
Yes.
story? We've got to reverse this situation.
Yes, and we're not alone in this, and it's all of us, businesses and arts organizations and the health sector, everyone who is. So if we are able to feed that really great understanding and attraction that St. Louis is a destination and people can choose to live here. And, you know, the immigrant population is key to continuing to thrive and grow St. Louis as a metropolitan area that is the envy of others, but also in terms of, you know, feeding into our economy and making sure we can sustain our institutions. There's going to be a very important generational shift ahead of us, obviously. I mean, the second, you know, the silent generation who has really shaped the cultural institutions over the course of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and today are leaving us, right? This is a natural transition. And baby boomers, who we used to think of the young kids around the block, they are entering their 70s. They are just raising grandkids. They are, you know, traveling the world. And so there's all these elements that come together that really helps us think about how do we need to behave differently. And how do we need to think about that future? But the quality of the art, the music, the community is so strong. And I think there's something that will happen. I mean, it's not going to happen by accident. But I think there's definitely a pull that this idea of one leadership of all of us is going to be very, very, very exciting.
And so you feel hopeful?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, I'm a believer. I've been here now, I'm coming on 11 years, and I don't think that I would want to live anywhere else or would want to invest anywhere else than St. Louis.
Marie-Hélène Bernard, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Marie-Hélène is the president and CEO of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. In just a moment, we'll hear from St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Krull for the closer. But first, a word from our sponsor. This episode of the 314 podcast is supported by the Great Forest Park Balloon Race, presented by PNC Bank. Experience the Great Forest Park Balloon Race on September 19th and 20th, a one-of-a-kind St. Louis family tradition. Thanks to the generous contributions of sponsors, attendance is free. An event for those seeking joy and connection. This annual September tradition brings families and friends together for a weekend of wow moments, unforgettable experiences, and memories that will last a lifetime. Learn more at greatforestparkballoonrace.com. And now for the closer. St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Krull was in court last week as a judge heard an alarming tale. Two brothers said they'd been in their family's longtime home in Shaw when sheriff's deputies came knocking. They were told they'd been evicted and needed to grab some clothes and get out now. The brothers say they received no notice of the eviction. And as Ryan learned, that was almost certainly the truth, thanks to a new Missouri law. He joins us now to tell us all about it. Ryan Krull, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
So you told the story of John Thomas and Robert Favron. Their mom owned a home on Cleveland Avenue in Shaw for 30 years. Then she died. And this trustee who was supposed to look out for these brothers sold the home on August 28th. So how did the sheriff's deputies end up at their door like just a couple days later?
Sure. So it's kind of a complicated saga, but the short version is that last year in November, whenever the mother Virginia was very sick with cancer, she created a trust which named the two brothers and their two sisters as the beneficiaries of the trust. She passed away in January. And then in August, just last month, the house was sold to an LLC. And because, like you said, because of this new law, the brothers, without getting any kind of notice, the new owner filed an eviction. There was no court hearing. There was nothing like nailed to the front door or anything like that. Just the deputies show up on September 3rd and say, hey, you guys got to get out. And they had about 10 minutes to kind of get what they could, and they had to, find somewhere to crash for about the next week.
That seems crazy.
Yeah.
It seems terrifying. How is that a difference from the way they used to handle evictions under Missouri law?
Sure. So it used to be up until last year that if you were being evicted, you would get some kind of notice, and you would have a chance to kind of make your case in court. There would be a hearing before a judge. If you felt like you had a right to be there, you could make that argument. You could hire a lawyer to make that argument. But now, during COVID, there was all these eviction moratoriums, which created a big backlog for these housing courts. And sort of out of that created a lot of discontent among, property owners and landlords and that sort of thing. So they passed some new laws throughout the country, as well as in Missouri, that basically say if the person in the house is squatting in the house, they don't need any kind of hearing, any kind of notice. The property owner can file an eviction in what's called an ex parte hearing, which means only one party is present, so just the landlord, just the property owner. And then, a judge rules that person out, and then the next thing, the sheriffs show up and kick them out.
So I know a number of people who are landlords. I know it's a hard job, can be super frustrating, and people who've had to deal with people who are actually squatters.
Yeah.
But how do you go about finding out who's a squatter and who's not if the other guy doesn't get their day in court?
Yeah, so you're totally right. It's a real thing. There's headaches that come with being a landlord for sure. And
you know this yourself.
Sure, yes. I am technically a landlord.
Which is crazy, but carry on.
But yeah, so the critics of this new law, I think they acknowledge that there was a real issue for landlords, especially created during COVID. But this solution just creates a whole host of new problems, specifically because it's kind of painting with this very broad brush. Basically, if you declare the person in the house to be a squatter, they lose sort of all these sort of rights of notice and rights to have a hearing and that kind of thing. And the problem is that it's just one person saying, oh, this person is a squatter. There's no kind of due diligence. There's no sort of mechanism to figure out, okay, are they actually squatting or not? It's really just one party's word.
Yeah, what could go wrong?
Exactly. So there's no safeguards. There's no sort of checks and balances at play. Except in this case where they're actually kind of by just a sort of quirk, there was a check and balance in play.
Yeah. So this case is unusual in that perhaps the most media savvy lawyer in town ended up getting involved fighting these brothers. How did that end up coming into play?
Yeah. So fighting for these brothers.
Yes, an important distinction.
Exactly, yeah. So John Thomas and Robert, their neighbor, is Javad Kazeli, a sort of very well-known attorney. Yeah, likes to sort of, play the media angle in his cases. So at the hearing in Judge Mike Doffin's court, Javad shows up, and Judge Doffin even sort of made a quip saying, like, I see you brought your entertainment core with you.
That being you.
It was just me and one other reporter. I guess that's a core, but yeah.
In St. Louis.
In St. Louis it is, yeah. He basically he promised, he was really close with their mother, Virginia, before she passed away. And he said, if there's anything I can do to help your kids, I'm going to, try to do it. So he was making good on that promise here. And he heard about these two guys, kind of being put out on the street. He wanted to do something, started looking into it. He found this specific case had a lot of sort of quirkiness, a lot of weirdness going on, which is almost sort of a separate story to the fact that they didn't get any notice. So he was there in court. His goal for the hearing was to try to get him back in the house until some of these kind of larger issues could be straightened out. So at least they could have some stability in their life as they kind of plan their next move.
Yeah, give us like the 1-minute version of what's the bigger backdrop to this that Javad now seems to be investigating.
Yeah, so this is separate from the squatters' law. Obviously, in the case of these two brothers, they're intertwined. But so the house on Cleveland, I believe it was on August 28th, it was sold from the trust that Virginia had set up to a company called Coca LLC, and that it was sold for $190,000.
Kind of cheap for Shaw.
Very cheap for Shaw. Even like the city assessor, who lowballs properties, he had the property listed at $250,000. So it was about $60,000 less than the city felt it was worth. So on August 28th, it sold for $190K. And then literally like at the exact same second, according to property records, it sold from Coca to another LLC called GoldenEye Management for $300,000.
Huh.
So my understanding is that basically the brothers and their sisters who are part of the trust, they would basically get that $190K because it was their house. It was in the trust's holdings. It sold for $190K. That goes to the trust's beneficiaries. But then it's Coca, this entity Coca, that makes the $110,000 instantly by selling it for $300K. So right away, that's really weird. It's unusual for a property to be sold twice in 1 second, as far as so that's kind of sketchy right away. And then GoldenEye LLC, they advertise themselves. They're St. Louis based. They advertise themselves as one of these companies that will sort of buy your house for cash.
Sure.
And they immediately took out a mortgage on the house for about $450,000, which is probably kind of closer to what its market value is, rather than $190K.
So some interesting real estate transactions here. Javad may well have a totally separate civil case. Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah.
And yet, as you say, not really probably on point for what's going to happen with the eviction. How was Javad able to actually win in court?
Yeah, it was kind of on a technicality. So this guy, Daryl Perkins, he's the owner of GoldenEye Management, the final LLC in that sort of line of transactions. And he's the one who filed the eviction notice, but he filed it as Daryl Perkins, when in fact the proper owner of their house is GoldenEye Management LLC. So the eviction lawsuit was basically like improperly filed to begin with. This is kind of a salient issue here because I don't think either of the brothers, I don't think maybe you or I would have picked up on that, but because there was a lawyer involved kind of on behalf of these two guys, he was able to, pick up on that, see that, argue that, hey, this thing was improperly filed to begin with. Ergo, at least for the meantime, the two, John Thomas and Robert get to go back into the house, at least until the sort of eviction is properly filed.
And suggests that, the way Missouri law has changed, it's going to be a lot harder to get this kind of hearing. That's something to keep an eye on as these evictions wend their way through the courts or not.
Yeah, basically my read of the situation is, because of this law, if not for this law and then sort of like, if not for these two guys being neighbors with an attorney, they probably would still be, out of the house right now. Literally not. They would still reap the benefits of that initial sale, but they would literally be not able to go back into the house.
Yeah. Their longtime family home.
Yeah.
Well, this will be interesting to keep an eye on. St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Krull, thank you for joining us.
Sure thing.
I'm Sarah Fenske, and that's the 314 for today. You can find out more in our podcast show notes and at stlmag.com. You can also find me and Ryan every day in your inbox. That's thanks to St. Louis Magazine's fantastic free newsletter, St. Louis Daily. It's a fresh take on St. Louis with insight and original reporting. Sign up at stlmag.com/newsletters. The 314 is a production of St. Louis Magazine. I'm Sarah Fenske, and this is the 314. See you next time.